All right. Thank you for being here. Gregg Stewart, writer, journalist, composer. There's some other things on that list too, I'm sure we'll talk about. What do you or where do you think creativity originates?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big question to kick it off. I love this. So, where creativity originates is an elusive thing, I think, for people. I mean, sometimes it comes with a spark of an idea, and it's interesting where people can credit that to. And I believe in all of it. Sometimes it's a spark from the divine, and sometimes it's simply just two connections made between two different experiences, and you come up with this third idea. Um, but there's a lot of ways I think you can engage with creativity. I certainly think uh, being around an inspiring conversation can spark creativity, but also being alone in nature can spark creativity. So it can come from many places, I believe, but almost always, um, ultimately from within you. Because it's one thing to even get that, say, that spark of the divine, and it's another thing to be willing to process it, to look at it, to engage with it, and then see how you'd want to share that with others. So I think all of that is creativity.
Do you visualize like the creative essence or spirit being in some place? How do you interact with it?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when it comes to creativity, so much of it is about the willingness to really check in with your deeper subconscious. I think that's the real power of what we can learn from being creative as well. And it's one thing to kind of go to sleep and dream, and it's another thing to kind of wake up, think about your dreams, and wonder what some of those symbols might have meant and how our subconscious communicates to us. And I think those same opportunities are available through our creativity. And so often we'll kind of say, write something down or a poem or paint a picture, and we're quick to share it with others. Or maybe we don't want to share it with others. It depends on the person. But um, oftentimes, even as we're certainly when we're kids, we're quick to say, look what I did. Um, but I think one of the real powerful tools that creativity brings to our life is checking in with, of all the things I could have written, all the things I could have painted, why did I choose to write this? Why did I choose to paint this? What's my subconscious trying to tell me about my life, and what can I learn from it? What's the lesson? And I do believe that that lesson is often coming from somewhere outside of us, but then lodges itself deep within us. And it's our job to unearth it. We don't always get the lesson just from seeing it, and we know this in in a lot of areas of our life. Sometimes we can repeat the same upset again and again, and we wonder why we're not getting the lesson. It isn't until we really sit down and journal about it do we really start to see it, see what we might be able to learn about ourselves and how we operate and interact with the world. And
Do
I
you
think
have a
that's important. Sorry, yeah.
do you have a certain process that you use to be able to get into that, like the flow or the connection with creativity?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think when I was younger, I very much wanted to wait for inspiration to strike. If I wasn't feeling it, I wasn't doing it. And so what I've learned over the years is the practice of simply having a practice of being creative, whether that means I wake up an hour earlier than I planned and sit down and, and with my guitar, or I sit down in front of the computer to write whatever expression I'm feeling in the moment. But I book my time with it and I put in that time, and I don't wait for inspiration to strike. I trust that, kind of like going to the gym. Like, you build a muscle around it, and then it flows so much more freely once you feel, like going to the gym, you just feel strong in your body. You can, if you happen to take a week off because you're traveling or on vacation, you can come back to the gym and you don't feel like you're starting from scratch again. It's the same with creativity. If you build it like building a muscle and build a habit around it, that inspiration flows much more quickly to you than simply waiting for the inspiration to strike.
Do you feel that creativity is different, or the way you engage with it is different depending on the medium that you use? Like if you're writing versus if you're composing or poetry or something else?
Yeah, I think definitely. Depending, well, it's interesting. It's actually a tricky question because on the one hand, yes, there's certain craft that you learn along the way that you bring to the medium, right? There's a craft of poetry that's different than even the craft of songwriting. The addition of melody changes how you choose to express yourself. And certainly with photography, that it's a whole other thing. It's all about the visual and not necessarily about the words. And so there's craft to learn that changes how you interface with it. But I think the initial spark and the idea of what you want to create, I think it points you towards a specific medium. I'm grateful that I've been living a kind of creative life where I like doing multiple things, and I want a wide, an expansive toolkit, I'll call it, of avenues to express my creativity. It's not just songwriting or not just poetry, but also through journalism, or even just film composing, or writing short stories, or writing a novel or a screenplay. And I'm grateful that I've kind of really I dove in to really want to learn the nuances of all those mediums. And I'm grateful that my creative expression has multiple avenues. Some people don't necessarily have that available, but oftentimes you can still learn a ton about yourself from just having one avenue, just knowing your one jam. This is what I do. I'm a poet. That's it. And there's still so much you can learn about yourself from just that one avenue.
Yeah, I think that definitely there's generalist and specialist when it comes to creativity. And you
That's true.
get like the idea when you just talked about photography, I can see the different connection with that versus poetry. Like I guess I could look at something and then start to think poetically or feel that connection. But with photography, you hit that right little scene, you see something and you're like, well, that's the picture right there. That's the
Mm.
light is a certain way, the subject matter is a certain something, and then you just have that inspiration at that moment versus you just going out and taking pictures. That I think
Yeah,
that you can equate that with poetry and other things too. I think I
totally.
feel it the strongest with poetry, just that connection with it where you can tell when it's just you doing it, and then you can tell when there's something else that's there, whether it's the conduit or working through you or whatever. The inspiration is there. And
Yeah.
I used to worry that it would go away. Like I
Mm.
am grateful every time, but and I think that's part of the thing that drives me to take notes when the idea occurs, because you've missed notes before and then you're like, oh, you feel bad about it. So you
Mm.
want to do justice to that, whatever that creative thought is. But with poetry, if I'm just writing something, I can definitely tell that's a poem I wrote versus that's a poem that's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah, that's a really great distinction you're bringing up. And I think one of the ways I notice if I'm getting into that deeper place with the work is uh, when time starts to disappear. I think when you find yourself in what I call the slipstream of your creativity, it's kind of like you
Mm.
can't believe 3 hours just went by, or you thought it was 15 minutes and it's been 2 hours, or that's when you're getting lost, a little lost in it, and something's really flowing. And also, I think I always say, like, until you ugly cry or let your freak flag fly, you're not necessarily there yet at the heart of what you're trying to create. It should be either celebratory or cathartic, or a combination of those things. Is when you know you're something is something is revealing itself to you through the work, which I think is powerful. And I love too what you're talking about, even just talking about photography. You just spoke about it like a poet. I like it. This way in which when you find the light just right. And I talk about it in the book. There's like you can take 10 people and say, take a picture of that tree, and you'll end up with 10 very different photographs. Somebody will lay down in the grass and shoot up at the leaves, and
Mhm.
another person from a far distance alone, the tree on a hill. And they tell really distinct stories, those photographs, depending on the vantage point and your particular eye. And I love that about our creative expression, that it is unique, and we do all have a unique voice to share, and a vantage point on our creativity.
I do wonder at times what that creative force is doing
Mm.
if I'm not engaging with it. So I think that's what spurs me a little to keep trying to make that connection, because I worry that it's there just bored, like it's hanging around the house in a robe, walking around drinking milk out of the carton, just waiting. But I feel like there's a
Love that.
lot of other outlets that creativity has, that it's not just a connection with me, that it's if I turn away from an idea, it's going somewhere. It's
Mm.
got to express itself somehow. So,
Yeah,
but
that's really great. I think it's awesome what you're saying. I love this visual of just your creativity just hanging out. Like, when are we going to get to it, guy? I love that.
yeah,
At the same time, I sometimes think about it almost like just a infinity pool that I can just like it's there for me to like quench my thirst, dip a ladle into, and it's just waiting and patient without any judgment. It's kind of it's another way to to look at it too. But I think it's awesome the idea of is a certain intentionality, the idea that it's kind of waiting around for you a little bit, like when you're showing up. If that's a motivator, then I think that's an awesome visual or a way to look at it. That's really great. I often tell myself too, like this idea of like the Greek muses, the way they would take this kind of arrow approach and kind of shoot you with an idea. And I think there's just so many people on the planet now and so many people who have gotten too busy to engage with their creativity. I think the muses have somehow taken a shotgun approach. I think instead of shooting just one arrow of an inspiration of an idea into you, they shoot 100 people at once and hope one person will make the time to take on that idea, which is why so many people, I think, read a synopsis for a movie or hear a song and go like, oh, I had the idea to write that song, or I had the idea to write that movie. I don't know why I didn't do it. It's because the muse went to that's one of the 99 other people who got hit with that idea. So certainly it's a reminder that if you get hit with inspiration, trust that there's 99 other people who have that same idea at the same moment as you, and maybe get on it. That's sometimes a way I look at it. That's a motivator for me.
yeah, you got to do it justice, or the muse isn't going to worry about you much anymore. It
Right, it moves
it
on.
does seem like the more you show up, the more it's realizes, if you see it, it sees you type of thing,
That's great.
to
Yeah,
where
yeah, and
it's
it
easy
flows.
to ignore it, and then you just live a life uninspired, I guess. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, my friend who lives in town, he calls it the beige life. When you're not engaging with your creativity, you're simply just consuming the world around you. And also, what that does to you over time is it starts to cut you off from really experiencing inspiration, passion, being emotionally moved by the things in life. When you're in touch with the creativity, there's a wider range of how you engage with the world and how it moves you and touches you. And if you cut yourself off from that, if you don't engage with it enough, it really costs you in multiple ways. Just a more bland kind of life.
Hmm. Yeah, I used to, instead of personifying that, whatever it is, that I used to visualize it as a stream or a river or a well.
Mm,
Water was always interesting, but yeah, where it's just there and it's waiting, and you can anytime go to it and draw out what you need. And then I started visualizing it more, of just thinking about it more like, where does it come from? If it's in a well or if it's in the water, where is that originating?
mm,
And then started to think more about like a division between realities, that there's this space between two separate worlds, that neither side can go into the other side, but maybe you can go halfway into that space between,
yeah.
and you can meet the other side there. And then the question is, are you the creative inspiration to the other thing and they're the creative inspiration to you, or is it just the one way? I don't know.
Mm. I think that's really interesting to think about. Yeah, this idea that maybe we only just never really get to dip our toe, not even halfway. I don't know, in that other side, and it's up to us to really, um, continue kind of engaging with it and see what shows up. I always say it's an opportunity to learn and discover something about ourselves, because at the end of the day, even the pureness of creativity, even if it's coming from another place, it inevitably moves through this filter of our own experience, all the things, all the people we've ever met, the experiences we've had, and it's a filter, and it gives us that particular idea a unique vantage point and a unique expression. And so when we look back on what we created, why did I choose to honor this idea of all the ideas and all the moments of inspiration? Why this? We can discover something about ourselves, and hopefully through that discovery become a little more comfortable in our own skin, a little more comfortable with who we are and what we're about. We learn a little more about ourselves. And I think we're all on a journey to become more comfortable in our own skin and be more at peace with who we are. I think that's part of what it means to be human, is to just our souls inside this meat case made of star stuff,
Mhm.
just bouncing off of one another, and how we connect with one another, how we miss one another, all of that, the joy, the heartbreak of it, everything. And it's important we experience it, and we share what it's like to live in our own skin. More to accept ourselves, not necessarily to convince somebody else of something, but more to figure out, ooh, what's touching me, what's moving me, who am I? Who am I really? Our creativity is going to point that out to us in a lot of ways, and probably in faster than any other way we can think of to do it, to discover ourselves.
Yeah, I'd often think that maybe that creativity is just the part of this universal oneness that as a human you can't understand because you're limited in your experience and perspective while you're here in this thing we call reality.
Hmm.
That it's it's that little bit of prodding on or just maybe comfort from somewhere else letting you know that there's more to life than just the beige life, if you will,
Right,
that there is something else, but it can't explain it totally because you're just not able to understand it as a human. But
right.
knowing that it's there, I think I find it comforting knowing it's there.
Yeah, exactly. I do find it comforting as well, knowing that it's there and available, and to engage with, and realize again. I say engaging with your creativity ultimately is soul medicine, and it's not necessarily medicine for the physical body, but something deeper. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all of that is giving us our current health. Um, and if we're not engaging with it or in that discovery, it could cost us. It could cost us our self-expression. Our self-expression can lead to bitterness or depression and all of those things, and it has an impact on our physical body. Um, I always say, like, I've seen people, and I know people who have, they'll smoke cigars and they'll eat a steak and fast food and they'll live to 100. But I've never seen anybody stress themselves out to 100, and I've never seen anybody suppress their emotions and live to 100. Like, I feel like the impact physically and mentally, our physical and mental outlook has on our physical body is sometimes more than physically how we treat our body. And I think creativity really gives us an opportunity to find a little more balance with our emotional and mental selves, and really find a little bit more understanding about who we are, a little more acceptance of who we are. And I think there's a possibility for longevity inside of engaging with our creativity. And I see some of the people who, every time they interview, someone who's it's their 105th birthday on the news or anything like that, they always talk about having some practice of just working in their garden, and or painting, or some practice where they just found joy and could get lost in it, and find some peace and acceptance about their lives. And so I think creativity offers that as well.
Yeah. Another small question then.
Sure.
What do you think the reason for our existence is
Wow.
in this version of existence
Yeah.
that we call reality?
I didn't know we were talking the really big questions today. I love this. Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, I think, mm, the truth is I don't know that anyone has any proof around any of this, right? So I think part of our journey and our experience is to continue to question and be okay with not having all the answers, and to be on a kind of exploration of what does it mean to be human and live this life. What does it mean? And there's 8 billion people on this planet now, and counting. And I think you're going to have 8 billion little variations on that. But on what it means to be human, and what it means to live this life, and what are we really doing here. And so I don't think there's any real one meaning of life, but I think there's something really powerful in that, the fact that there isn't necessarily one meaning of life, a one size fits all. There's an opportunity for you to say what your life's about, for you to claim, what is my life going to be about? And it takes some time and experience to figure out what that is, I think. And I think it's important to ask yourself that question every now and again, because it's really easy for us to kind of, work at a job and build someone else's dream, and if that is your calling, then it's worth doing. Do that. But if you feel you have more to say, and you're not getting to that thing that you feel really called to say, then I would definitely encourage you to ask yourself, what is my life really about? And why am I not putting in enough time to share what that is? Explore it and share it.
Yeah, I like that. I think a lot of when you hear a lot of religions, a lot of different views on society and life, that the the common thing is experience and perspective. And there's a lot of quotes, whether you're talking biblical quotes or other places that talk about life being the journey, not
Mhm.
the destination,
Yeah.
and that the idea of, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, treat people like like you would want to be treated. That the idea that we're here in this reality, we'll call it a reality, although we could call it a simulation and it would mean the same thing. That is just the word we're calling it. That
Mhm.
that I wonder if we are a part of a whole or a part of something bigger, whether we're all the same thing or not. That if you can keep that in the forefront of your mind going through the day to day, that I'm not going to be mean to this person because that person is me. I don't know if that draws out some sort of like self-serving thing of it. I think it's more of just the realization of, if we're all one and the reason we're here is perspective and experience. I think that explains a lot, because that's why there's so many different pieces. This Every person has that perspective, as you're talking about all these different experiences, and then you can explain, well, why do bad things happen, why do good things happen? We don't even need to define good or bad, but we could. Certainly as a human you could, as an individual you could, but maybe the purpose is to experience that. So when there's a roadblock in your way or a hard time, that's the reason you're here, is to experience that and to know what it feels like. Whether we pick our story in the beginning, like we're starting some video game and we say, these are some things I want to learn along the way.
Mhm.
That if you knew that that's why you were here, it would ruin it. You
Right.
couldn't, you can't see past this this thing we're in, because the whole reason is to experience helplessness and love and pain and heartache and all those things. I don't, maybe it makes it a little easier to deal with, but I'm sure that in the times of pain, if you said to somebody, look, this is why you're here, you're experiencing this pain, that's not really going to be helpful. But maybe if you have that just in your subconscious of it, that it is helpful, that you can think that that's why there's things that are bad and things that are good. And then maybe you treat each other a little better too, if you're thinking we're all the same thing.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lot of things you're speaking to here that I think are really powerful, um, and some of it's a little paradoxical. And I'm finding in my life as I get older, some of the most profound lessons in life are a little bit paradoxical. First, in that the idea that, if we are kind of all one, you consider it like a giant uh, pane of glass is one thing, a giant pane of glass. The pane of glass can't see what life, anything looks like through the
Mm.
pane of glass, because you're all the pane of glass. But if you shattered it into millions or even billions of fragments, suddenly one shard of glass can see what it looks like through another shard of glass. Suddenly you have this awareness. And yes, and on the one hand, that creates a kind of otherness, the ability to actually see that oneness for the first time. But also, there's important to remember that there's really no such thing as other. We're all part of the same stuff. We're all made of the same stuff. There's a finite amount of matter on this planet. Every cell that I'm made of, and every cell that you're made of, has always been here. You know,
Mhm.
and that's kind of amazing to think about. And that is another level of actual, truly physical connection. You and I, we if we're together and we pick say an apple off a tree and we cut it in half and you eat half of it and I eat half of it, the cells from that apple become cells in your body. And that cells from that same apple become part of my body. And in that, there's almost like a cellular recognition almost when we see one another. It's why people talk about the power of breaking bread, sharing a meal. You we have sympathetic cells that used to be the same thing and now live inside of each of us. And I think there's a lot of ways that we're truly and intrinsically connected in ways that we cannot separate. And also, we're paradoxically our own selves as well to experience the world freely. And again, it's just a paradox. I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not supposed to be able to understand it.
Exactly.
It's beyond this interface. If you're taking the AI version,
Sure.
it's I mean, it explains a lot. If you were part of an all-powerful being, then maybe that all-powerful being is interested in what it's like to not feel all-powerful. And certainly, I guess whatever you want to call it, could feel that if they could do anything and were all powerful. Maybe this is just the way they feel it, is you break it all into pieces and then they all interact with each other. And then you come back later on and you go, oh, okay, now I know all these billions of perspectives over these however many years of experience. And yeah, I think you get lost in the idea of the regular world when you don't think about those bigger issues.
Yeah.
Now, you could get lost in those bigger issues if you didn't engage with the world. So there does need to be a balance, moderation and everything, even in moderation. But
moderation and moderation, I love it. Yeah. Yeah, good point. That's great. It's great. It's great.
So with your creative ventures,
yeah,
songwriting and composing, how do you see those things differently? Like if you were scoring a movie versus writing a song, is that the same type of thing, or is that a different way you approach it?
Oh yeah. So yeah, definitely different. That's a really great question. So with songs, oftentimes I'm playing the guitar or sitting at a piano and just kind of, it starts out. Carlos Santana actually talks about this too, not to go name droppy about the whole thing, but Carlos Santana says every time he sits down with the guitar, even to this day, he first starts playing and he's like, oh, that reminds me of a Miles Davis lick. And he'll keep playing and he'll say, oh, that's a little bit Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. And if he just keeps going, at some point he kind of settles into this feel and he goes, there I am. Like he finds his own voice, his style, his feel. But he never just drops into it. You usually start by, like anything, you're taking in the world and what inspires you, and then slowly you find your voice and your style and all of that. And I think with songwriting for me, so much of it is just I pick up the guitar and I start strumming a Tom Petty song or whatever it is I heard on the radio earlier that day. And then slowly I start falling into what feels like me or what am I thinking about. And you have to surrender, I think, a little bit. Just surrender to let it come through. And at some point, melody will come or a line or a word will kind of drop out of my mouth. And I'll go, that feels like the opening line, or that feels like a title maybe. And then I begin exploring what that means. And slowly the song will evolve. For me, both lyrics and music simultaneously, I guess. And some people just write it down almost like a poem. Bruce Springsteen's first record was all that, just poetry that he set to music later. Bob Dylan did a lot of things that way as well. Obviously Elton John, Bernie Taupin would write all the lyrics and then give it to Elton, and then Elton would set it to music. And if he didn't literally hear a melody right off the page as he was reading it, he would just toss it and say, Bernie, I need another. And so it's a flow thing with songwriting. You want to just get into that flow and expression of it and see what comes up. With composing, it's different because with composing, I compose for film composing. So there's already a picture there and a story being told and a narrative. And my job is to figure out how to accentuate that narrative, how to make that narrative feel more impactful. What's the core emotion of the scene? And how can I utilize music to make that emotion a little brighter? And sometimes the best work I've ever done as a composer is telling the director, I think you really need silence here and nothing. Is knowing when to get out of the way too, I think is a really important distinction too. But composing, it's truly about being of service to an existing narrative, to really surrender to that and really think about the core emotion that needs to come through, and using instrumentation and melody to kind of find that. It's definitely distinct in songs for me, but both of them extremely fulfilling, and I adore my time every time I get a chance to do both.
I like that explanation. It's kind of going back to the study of the tree with different people. You can take the 10 different people and the same tree. So if you're writing a song, you're looking for that different angle to explain that tree in your song,
Totally.
metaphorically speaking. And then if you're composing, you already have the picture of the tree, and now you're just highlighting it. That's nice.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. You're deciding where the sun sits and on this particular picture of the tree. Where is it coming from, behind and above, or is it setting? It's that. You can mess with the lighting of it a little bit for more drama, but that's kind of the game. That's what it's about. It's not about the tree. It's about how you showcase
It's interesting, all the different technologies now, especially for video editing, like I think it's CapCut, place things like that, where you
it.
can more easily put the picture in and then choose a bunch of different music that's already preloaded. You can have different types, and you can pick different music for the same scene, and the
Sure.
feel completely changes, whether you're doing like a samba or you're doing orchestra, you're doing western, you're doing circus music, all in the same scene. And you're like, no, this is a horror movie. You're not supposed to have a circus track in there. It's messing
Yeah,
it up. And then you think of movies that seemed kind of weird choices for the scores of it. Like Lady Hawk sticks out in my mind, that Rutger Hauer, Matthew Broderick,
totally.
maybe in the 90s or the 80s, where it was
Mhm.
kind of a medieval time movie, but there was electric guitar in it. And you're like,
Full
oh,
80s production, right?
yeah,
Synthesizers and
it seems a little out of place. But then you look at Flash Gordon, like the Flash Gordon back with Queen doing
Queen.
the music for it, and you're like, oh, that fits just right. But
Yeah,
maybe that's because it's more space agey, so you're expecting to hear that. But it's interesting, the effect that music has on just putting it with picture. Even if you're just sitting somewhere watching the world go by and listening to music, and you see things that match up every now and then, you're like, oh, this Vivaldi's going perfect with the way this squirrel is interacting on this
love
tree.
that.
So
Yeah. Oh man, I get real particular when I'm taking a road trip. I think about the terrain, where I'm going. I put together a
mm,
mix for myself. It's like it becomes important for me. I think a lot of people are like that. They're like, I need the right song for this particular journey. Yeah, and it does make a difference. I tell people, like, you want to sit in LA traffic for an hour listening to classical versus heavy metal music. You'll have a very different experience of an hour of traffic
yes,
depending on what you choose to listen to. Yeah.
yeah, wow. Yeah, I did find it going through Ireland, through the Cork and Kerry mountains, listening to Whiskey in a Jar, kind of
Yeah.
like brought that out a little more. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, this is what inspired this.
You
It's
listen to the
interesting when
Thin
you can
Lizzy version, or like, something older? Thin Lizzy or
uh,
Metallica? One of the covers?
an older version,
Oh,
well, a more folksy version. I
perfect.
can't
Yeah,
remember the name of the band, but it was a folk band.
love it.
Yeah, it fit in a little better. But
Absolutely.
it's something when you can see the creative choices, and maybe I see it in writing a lot, and then in dabbling with screenwriting, seeing it where people introduce ideas in books or in a show, and the writer side of you looks at it and goes, well, that's important, that's there
Yeah,
for a reason,
yeah.
because I wouldn't put it in there unless there was a reason. And then you get caught up in the mechanisms of it rather than just the entertainment value of it. But nature of the beast.
Oh, it's a funny thing once you really start diving into craft. There's things you learn that are, like, inspiring and surprising. And there's things you learn that you wish you could kind of unlearn. Like, can I just sit back and enjoy this movie? I'm thinking of why they never addressed that gun in the first scene.
Mm,
Like, why didn't they ever get back to that? That feels like something's off. And it's almost like, when I remember recording my first album, I was at a great studio in LA, and they're like, we're gonna bring in a mellotron. We think we need some strings on this next song. I was like, mellotron, this is great. This is the sound of the
mm,
flutes and Strawberry Fields Forever. This is the sand dunes of Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. This is gonna be amazing. And I remember going to the studio so excited. There's a mellotron we're having renting. It's being delivered, and it's like this little white box with like 16 keys on, like a little kid's white toy piano with just like
mhm.
a single loop of tape, for each one of them. And I looked at it and I was like, that's it. It's like, and it kind of for a minute it really ruined like listening to some of those songs. Like that just happened on this little 16 note little white plasticky box. And so yeah, there's things you wish you can unlearn once you really dive into the nuts and bolts of how things get made. But there is oftentimes still those things that we find inspiring and moving once you know. And when I see a movie with a really well written script, it gets me really excited. When you got a writer and a director that are just they checked every box and all the cylinders are firing, it's really amazing to witness. And I love discovering films like that when someone really knows their craft. It's cool.
Yeah. On the music side of it, I mean, then you have the sheer astonishment of the power of a 3-track machine. You get was
True.
it a Tascam or started with a T?
Yeah,
And
Tascam.
you're like, yeah, you're like, wow, look at all the things I can do with this just by myself. And now all that's in a computer, and it does
Yeah,
take away the majesty of maybe some Van Halen music that you can buy a pedal and sound just like it. But yeah,
yeah.
it's-
It's true, and I love that kind of that you bring up Van Halen because they were one of those bands where Ted Templeman, their A&R rep, who also produced a lot of their stuff, they go in the studio and he was all about getting them back to the live experience. And so they tracked live. They didn't really multi-track. Sometimes David Lee Roth would go in and overdub um, vocals later. Sometimes not though. They just put them in ISO booths and just it was all about capturing the magic of the performance, which is
mm,
takes us back to like Motown and like soul music and 1950s rock and roll. And this was a time where drum machines are getting introduced and multi-track recording was the thing. And I love that they were like back to basics. And why those songs I think still feel so exciting is because they were guys in a room. The chemistry was palpable, and the sound, the sonics of it were able to breathe, coming out of actual amplifiers and microphones. It was able to taste oxygen, the sound, and we resonate with that. We hear that as humans. Our ears hear that when
mm,
something is recorded just from one digital line to another digital line, and there was never any oxygen to let the music breathe. It 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 can sometimes feel a little dead. It can feel a
yeah,
little
it's
just
produced.
flatlined and produced. Yeah, but yeah, it's important. It's important to kind of how we connect with it and the way in which we approach it is important to consider.
Yeah, the magic of the jam is a
Yeah,
real thing.
yeah. And finding your jam, I think, is really important too. Just finding that thing that lights you up with your own creativity, I think, is really crucial. There's so many avenues available to us, like we've been saying. Songs and poems, photography, painting, all of that. But finding your jam, if you're someone who doesn't necessarily consider yourself super creative, if there's someone listening who's like, oh, this is interesting, but I'm not really a creative person. I do believe strongly everyone is inherently creative. You have to be creative just to navigate being alive, just navigating your home life, your work life, even the grocery store. You got to be creative, but it's all about redirecting that into what's going on inside of you and finding what it is that lights you up, whatever the avenue that is for you. Just find it and engage with it and see what you discover about yourself.
Yeah, when I feel, I mean, I don't think I ever had the idea of feeling like I couldn't connect with creativity. It's just the trying to figure out that piece that you want to connect with, or how you're going to do it, or what's going to be different. And then visualizing the creativity as these entities that are different, like the poetry one versus the song one
Mhm.
versus, building something, painting something, that's all these different things, but they work together. And then if I'm ever have the time in a waiting room or whatever, I just put them in a room together and imagine what their conversation is about. Like,
I love it.
it, and a lot of the settings are like those shows or the documentaries, rockumentaries, whatever, where they're talking to like Keith Richards about music, or ZZ Top, the behind the music things, where you think, where, I mean, just listening to Keith Richards talk about music theory was, I didn't expect him to be that into it.
Mm,
And I
mhm.
was like, wow, this is really good. I like that. And then the ZZ Top one, I think it was like a 2-part or a 3-part episode of things where they talk about how the band was formed and how long they played together that first night, and, just blues boogie and B or G or whatever it was. And you're like, yeah, that is ZZ Top, isn't it?
That's cool.
And I like those. And then Jason Momoa has this show too, On the Roam, I think is the name of it. And I thought it was just going to be like a motorcycle show of him riding around motorcycles, kind of like the Jason Reedus one, which is a good show, both good
Oh,
shows.
Norman
I
Reedus.
think
Yeah,
that's,
yeah, super
yeah,
cool.
Norman Reedus.
Yeah,
What's Ride, I think is the name of that
yeah,
one.
super cool.
Well, that's a good one because you're listening to all these creative people talk about things. And then Jason Momoa's, I think that's his name,
Yep, yep,
Aquaman,
yep.
that his, you can really see his passion for all different types of art, whether it's making a knife, making a guitar, riding a motorcycle,
Mm,
photography, all those things. And what a great show that
that's
was.
cool.
I'm glad I found that one. But
Oh,
what made you interested in writing a book about creativity and connecting with it?
whew, yeah. So writing a book about creativity, obviously, I've been exploring multiple avenues for my creativity for 3 decades or more, and so it's one of those things that I'm honestly, it's just I'm talking about it all the time. Most people can't shut me up about it. So it's one of those things where it's like, why am I not just putting it all in one place? All these ideas and the things I've discovered and learned, and where I've failed at it epically, and what I learned from that, the pitfalls that I discovered along the way, and the discovering my process and all of that. And my wife and I run a monthly event in town called Storyworks, and it's really just a place for creatives, whatever you're creating, whether it's a poem, a song, essay, scene from a screenplay. Come, and you've got 5, 7 minutes max to just share what you're working on. It's not about a performance. It's just about here's the work in progress, because so much of our creativity happens in isolation. We're alone at a desk or sitting alone in a room with our instrument, and so this felt like a really fun and safe space to say, let's just all get together, all of us who are creating, and share what we're working on with each other and support one another, even if it's just applauding when we get to the end of it, or we can give some feedback. And um, really, it just became such a special night. We just celebrated the 2-year anniversary of it, and it was just really magical what comes up. And I learned some things from doing it. First, that no two expressions are the same. Like we always are surprised and delighted by the things we'll see. And people who have brought in poems maybe for the first year are suddenly coming in with piano pieces. We have someone who is a documentary filmmaker and is now just brought in. She's been learning how to play the harp, and she brought in her harp to play for us what she's been learning. And watching everyone's creative outlets kind of expanding from the influence of being around one another and seeing all these different ways of expressing yourself has been fun and exciting. And then also, I think one of the biggest things is realizing that it's not talent that moves the room. I think I always thought talent is what moves the room, but it isn't. It's vulnerability. I can see someone who maybe just picked up the guitar, or like I said, playing the harp for only a few months, or picked up the guitar a few weeks ago, or learned 3 chords and turned out they decided they wanted to write a song. It's the courage and the vulnerability to show up. And when we feel that vulnerability, and certainly the vulnerability in what we're choosing to express, in the how revealing the lyrics might be, it moves the room every time, more than talent, more than being really proficient at your instrument, or really a savvy, clever poet or a writer. It's the more vulnerable the work, the more the room is touched and moved. And vulnerability is available to anybody if you're willing to go there. If it's not about talent, it becomes about something more accessible than I think we realize. Really having something creatively profound. All you got to do is kind of open your heart into the work and then be courageous enough to share it. And that's really where the book came from. The book really came from that discovery, and then wanting to just put into words all the things I was discovering and talking about creativity literally for the past 30 years. I wanted to put it all in one place, things I've been discovering.
What was your process for writing it then? Like,
So
did you set time aside each day? Were you going
yeah.
for topics, word count? Where did you write it?
So this book is very different than anything else I've written. I've written novels, I've written short stories in various anthologies, and obviously as a journalist, I've done interviews and for articles. This one, because it's kind of nonfiction, showed up in a way that I've never worked before. But I'll tell you exactly how I did it. I started thinking about what it would look like if I wrote this book. And then I jotted down what felt to me like 10 chapter headings. Like, what would be the rough outline or the flow of how I'd want to lay out this conversation for people. to really give them practical tips and tools for engaging with their creativity, and also not just the how to do it, but also the why do it. And so I wrote down those ten headings, and then I found myself alone in the house for the day. My wife and my daughter were out visiting a friend, having a pool party day, and I kind of had the house to myself, which doesn't always happen. And so I literally picked up my phone and I started leaving myself a voice memo of like, okay, based on this header, here's what I would talk about if I were to write it. And I got so engaged and lost in this idea of talking about each of my chapter headings, talking about what I would say, that I realized I had about 2.5 hours of voice memos later in the day. And I thought, why not just send out these voice memos and get them transcribed, like I do when I do an interview for a journalist article. I interview and I record the interview and I send it out, and then I just pull things from it as I'm writing the article. And so this is what I did. And it turns out they were running a July 4th special. This happened literally just the weekend before July 4th that I kind of thought about this book, did it. And then I got it back, and I had about 60 pages just right off the bat. And that became my first draft, my jumping off point. So as I went through and read it and deleted all the reallys and the veries and all the stuff that when I talk, and took it out of passive voice in places and just cleaned it up from an editorial standpoint. And then got inspired to say, oh, I hear what I'm trying to say here, but here's something more I could say. And just kept kind of fleshing it out from there. Soon I had about 100 pages, and 100 pages felt like about as much as I wanted to write, because I wanted it to be kind of like a little handbook or a manual or something someone could open up to any page on any given day and get a little kernel of wisdom from it, or some little insight, hopefully. Or you can read it all in one go. People live busy lives. And so I wanted to make it, if I'm just going to keep it practical and focused on just tips and tools to get engaged with creativity, it couldn't be a tome. I could have probably written a tome, honestly, but it wouldn't have been nearly as fun or beneficial to people, because just the rules of engagement would have been just a little overwhelming. So it's a simple book. It's a 100-page book. That's it. And really, it's just, that's how this one came. And there's no way I could have written like a short story or a novel that way. Like, I want to spend a lot more time thinking about character with fiction work, character, outlines, plot points, all of that stuff. But with this nonfiction, and I think because it's been the kind of stuff that I've been talking about and thinking about for 30 years, it flowed that way. And I'm grateful it flowed that quickly. So I literally had the first draft done within a month. And that was just getting to it almost every single day, just for a little bit, reading through it, adding to it, just because I was having fun engaging with it. And I love this. I wanted to keep that same pace and that energy that the first draft came. And then I sent it out to a couple friends, creative friends who I know and trust. They read it and they got back to me right away with some notes and some feedback. Have you thought about this? I incorporated all of that. And then I just decided I'm just gonna put it out. I could shop this to a publisher, but I feel like I need to experience self-publishing. Everything that I've published has always been published through a publisher, but I wanted to do it, especially if I was going to support someone else to self-publish. I wanted to have put myself through the ringer so I knew what I was talking about. So I said, let's just self-publish this and keep the same momentum going with this, the same momentum that it was written, get it out the door. And so the book was released in September 18th. And, literally, I didn't even start page one until, June 29th or 30th. So it was the most fast-tracked book I've ever written, certainly, and certainly the most fast-tracked book maybe I've even heard about from other people. But it felt like the right kind of momentum and really embodied what Let It Out, the title, is about. You got to just let it out and just follow that momentum and trust the momentum and let it take you, and don't resist it, and see where it leads you. And so that's the book. That's my process. I just gave you the whole long story.
Nice. I like a book that it's kind of like what you said before. You got to have the silence in there every now and then. A book that explains things, whether it's a self-help or kind of a how-to book or just some sort of explanation, a manual, that it doesn't need to keep repeating, because if you format it the right way, you can just go back and reference it. So it's nice and then it's not so daunting either when you look at a 100-page book and you go, oh, I can do this, do this, and refer to it when I need to and go back. So yeah, I like that. I think that lends itself to the ebook, and certainly to society nowadays. Seems like the attention span may not be there for everyone. And if you have a long attention span, then 100-page book's no problem. And if you don't, then you might be able to do a 100-page book. So I like it. Hits all the high points.
I mean, and it's
What
an
did
important thing you're bringing up too, because I think, we are more than ever in what we call now the information age through the internet and everything. We're inundated with information so often. And I think a lot of people, it's easy to kind of get a little burnt out of information. And honestly, there was a study done recently that I thought was amazing, or it's a couple of years ago already, the study was done. They say that in the average day, most people are met with through, news media, social media, all this stuff. They're met with more information than the average person in the 1850s would read in an entire year's worth of newspapers. That's a lot of information in a day that we're hit with, and a lot we're expected to retain and keep track of. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it. So I think it's important that we figure out how to communicate more effectively and more efficiently with one another too, and what we want to say. And also be really discerning about where we choose to engage and where we put our time and attention, that we're really doing that, because we're going to get hit with so much, and we're only going to retain so much of our capacity for what we retain, that it's important we be discerning, truly discerning about what we choose to engage with, and make sure it's something that truly is supporting our best selves. I believe.
What'd you think about the self-publishing process?
The self-publishing process was fun, and also a bit of a learning curve. And it's one of those things, it's almost like, I don't know, if you fill out enough forms online in your life, applying for this or that, it's kind of, there's a step-by-step process. You just have to just jump in and kind of fill it all out. There's a couple routes out there for people who are interested. There's Ingram Sparks, which will get you all over the place. It's really cool. And there's a little more, there's some interesting customizations they can do for you, like with even the formatting of your book. And then there's just Kindle Direct, which is basically just through Amazon. I opted to just go Kindle Direct just because it was a little faster and simpler. The fascinating thing, and I haven't really shared this with anybody, is that the real stumbling block to the whole thing was very simple: to set up the book, format the PDF, the inside pages. My wife was amazing. She's a great graphic designer. So she did my cover. She shot my author photo for me. So it's great to have those people. And actually, to do an ebook, to convert it into my PDF for print into an ebook, I just found a guy on Fiverr who did it for me in like 48 hours and $20, and it was done. And I reviewed it, and it looked great. He got all the links right and everything. And you definitely need to reach out and utilize a team to get it done, but there's a lot of people out there who can support you. But I think the one real stumbling block was with the final approval of proofs with Amazon, because I signed off on the front cover, and the front cover, it's let it out, and the word out kind of slightly bleeds off the page. It's like metaphorical, the idea of let it out, like it's busting off the cover. And after I approved the proof and everything else, they came back to me and said, your cover's been rejected because you can't have anything outside these margins. And I wrote them to say, okay, duly noted, but it's a metaphor. It's a thing. You get it? It's a thing. And they're like, no, we don't get it. You have to change your cover. I was like, but wait, you approved it for the ebook. And they said, yes, we approved it for the ebook, but we're not approving it for the print version because it has to be within these margins. And I was like, so I need two different covers? Anyway, it went back and forth like this for almost 2 weeks, honestly, until I was literally talking to upper management at Kindle, and then finally explained to them. And I had to actually find online huge books like Ready Player One, and like where I showed them, there's text bleeding off the page on these covers. Why aren't these covers getting rejected? And they're like, well, we're not printing those. Those are provided by the publisher. And I said, but clearly you see it can be done. And so I had to give them a whole layout of exactly like, here's why I don't believe Amazon should be dictating the terms of creativity. It was such a test because my book's all about creativity and not about allowing outside elements to stifle your creativity. So it's so perfect that this came up with the cover. And then finally they're like, oh, we're making an exception and you're approved and you have your cover. And I was like, great. And sometimes there's something to be said for just being just the relentless voice in the room and being the voice of, I thought the voice was reason, but ultimately I was probably just a pain in their ass. That's fine. But they approved it and it all worked out. But it took almost 2 weeks. But that was honestly the only stumbling block in the process. But I think the bigger lesson though in that is, I think whatever your book is about and whatever the lesson you're meant to learn from the book, that's what's going to come up. Something's going to come up for everybody. Like Werner Herzog, the director and filmmaker, says, is every day on the set is not without its sucker punch. And once you accept that there will be a sucker punch, you will take it with more grace. And I think it's the same thing with any creative endeavor. There's always going to be the one stumbling block. You'll never know what it's going to be. but it's important that you stick to who you are and your vision. And if you're clear on that vision, just see it through, and people will listen. If you can create a compelling enough argument, they'll step into it.
I do like Amazon, and I published some books with KDP, and I published some without through
Mhm,
like a vanity press, and I like KDP better.
mhm.
The doing a ebook for your book, they have a program on there which is pretty easy. $20 for a person to do it. That doesn't sound bad. But
Yeah.
if you're doing it and if you're planning on doing a couple books, then learning that yourself is pretty easy. You just got to know how to do the page breaks, which is
Sure.
just putting the page breaks in. And they have a little program that does it and an explanation of how to use it, which is pretty good.
Yeah,
The
it's great.
first time I used it was maybe in 2014 or 20, maybe a little after that with Amazon, maybe a little after that. And I've seen some improvements over a couple of years of it's gotten easier to use. But there is that learning curve, especially if you just do a book and then you come back the next year, some stuff has changed and some stuff you've just forgotten. So make a little manual for yourself when you do it the next time and save the headache. The way I got around the border is outside of that red box,
Mhm.
because that is aggravating, is you take your cover and you put your words on it where you want to in another program, and
Mm.
then you submit a picture for the cover to Amazon. That can go outside of the lines,
Ah,
and you don't put any words on it because they're in your picture. And
yeah, got
then
it. It's all just
then they'll
the words are simply all image. Yeah.
yeah, then
Ah,
it'll go outside of the line.
this is good.
So, but I had that same issue you had, and I didn't do 2 weeks of it, but maybe they had. Well, you just did that. So I was going to say maybe they were like, hey, we got another guy like this. But I did mine a few years ago, and it took a couple back and forths before they're like, okay, we'll do this exception for you this time, but
Mhm,
not next time. And
mhm.
then I just did the picture, and then that worked out for subsequent covers.
I love that. I'll keep
But
that in mind. Thanks for that.
I do like the control that Amazon gives you, because you're definitely with the print on demand is nice.
Yes.
People can get it easily. I think it's 80% of the book market is Amazon, which is pretty amazing. And then you can do the ISBN number through them, or you can get your own. And when
Yep.
you start looking into getting your own ISBN numbers, you get into the shady world of ISBN numbers and you wonder, is this a real one or not?
Right.
And just going through Amazon made it pretty easy. And then getting a copy so you can send it to the Library of Congress and have all that paperwork done. That's
Yeah.
nice too. But it's just it I felt I just want to get this done a bunch of times when putting books in there. And I can see how you get a bad book put out because you're not going back and doing the adjustments you need to, because you changed the borders on one page, which changed it for 50 pages after that. You just get sick of it and you want to be done with it. But a little patience on there, and I think that program is getting better and better. But
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
yeah,
And I think patience is important, and it's important to just kind of like just just keep working it and following it through and really having that eye to detail for it, because you do want to. It does make a difference, the quality of the final product, and so you don't want to necessarily throw up your hands, even when it's frustrating. Just keep going. It all works out.
it is nice that you can read it. Like you get a copy, you get the sample copy or the
Mhm.
proof,
Yep.
and then you can see what it looks like on the page. And then you're going to probably read it again, maybe in the future, or somebody's going to say, hey, you left out a quotation mark here, or
Right.
you didn't close this parentheses. And you can go in and change it relatively easy compared to if you went through a publisher and they made 500 copies of something and they're sitting in a warehouse.
Yeah,
But
that is the value of the print on demand. I think that's amazing. It's like you
uh,
can do another version of it if you catch something, which is great. Really helpful.
yeah, I think Whitman would have loved it with all of his reiterations of Leaves of Grass and how he changed it over the years.
Mm,
But yeah, it's a good program. I like it. I haven't had the experience of a publisher saying, "We're going to take care of everything. We'll give you $250,000 signing bonus, and we'll take care of your travel and lodging to all these book signings. I haven't had that experience,
Not
but
me. Not me.
the Amazon experience of it was pretty good compared to the vanity press self-publishing house, which is the writer is the product. They're not
Yeah.
worried about selling books so much. They're worried about selling a package to you as the writer.
Yeah.
So it's okay to experience it. And I
Mhm.
think when I did it in 2012 timeframe, it was $900, which was steep. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure you get $900 worth of it, but
Mm.
then I hear other people spending 10 and 20 and 30,000 on packages like that. And I'm like, oh, that's definitely a grift. Just publish it on KDP.
Exactly. Get it out there. Yeah. This is good. How many books have you published?
I think it's 6 or 7,
Wow, that's
something
amazing.
like that. Yeah, some
Yeah, fantastic.
full-length novels, some novellas I wrote with another guy, and then some
Nice.
poetry books. But yeah,
Beautiful.
it's nice. You can get the finished product, and it's all right. It's all right. Maybe they'll get popular after I die, kind of a Melville situation.
The Melville, the Van Gogh theory. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So good.
When you're writing, what kind of area are you looking for? Do you just need some place quiet, or
Mm.
what do you have a writing setup, a place you prefer to write, or where?
There's actually there's a few spots kind of around the house that I kind of find myself in. Right now, I'm actually sitting at my daughter's work desk. She's away at college, so I've been finding myself here, probably partly just to kind of feel connected to her, even. But there's
Mhm.
also right beyond me is just the window to the backyard, and I can kind of just see the birds fly by and look away from the screen every now and again when I'm writing, which is nice. Sometimes I'll see we have a cat now. We are not, just to be clear, we're not cat people, and
Mm.
and but this cat adopted us, just kind of showed up and wouldn't leave our front porch, and then it was very hot weather, so gave the cat some water because it's just the kind thing to do, and then the cat is just like, this is our cat, they're not going anywhere, and she never leaves the property, and she's a sweetheart and probably the most, has become skittish at first, but now the most affectionate cat I've ever met in my life. Wants to cuddle with us, wants her belly rubbed constantly. So but she's adorable and sweet, and so every now and again I'll look up, I'll catch her just roaming around the backyard. She'll look in the window, she'll see me in there, and she'll meow at me. I can't hear it with the windows closed, but she'll let me know I need to go give her some pets. It's a perfect opportunity for me to take a break from my day every now and again. We need to pause every now and again and just get out in the grass and pet a cat. It's good for the soul too. So
Okay.
yeah, this has been my favorite place lately. But I'll sit in my backyard and I'll write. I'll sit in my living room and write. The beauty of a laptop is you can kind of take it anywhere. I once took my daughter when she was younger. I took my daughter and her friend to one of those bounce houses. I don't know if you have these things, but one of those, it's just nothing but trampolines in a massive warehouse.
Oh,
And
okay.
like
Yeah.
just everyone's jumping from trampoline to trampoline, kids screaming everywhere, birthday cake. Birthday cake and trampolines don't mix well, by the way. I don't know, as a
Oh.
business model, I don't know how they're making it, but I literally sat in the corner and on my phone, just tapping on my thumbs, wrote a scene from the novel I was working on, and it felt really good. It felt really gratifying. Like, oh, I can tune out the world and do this anywhere, can't I? It felt really good. I don't need the candle just so or the light just right, and nothing to say that there's something wrong with needing the candle just so or the light just right, but it was good to know that I can, if the inspiration is hitting me, I will write anywhere. I don't. It could be screaming kids at a birthday on trampolines, and I'll figure out how to get a scene written. So I'm grateful for that.
I haven't tried writing with candlelight.
Yeah.
I don't know why I haven't tried that. I have to get on that. What then? What ways are you able to quiet the noise around you and focus on a storyline when you decide that's what you want to focus on?
So I think for me, what works for me is I talk about it too in the book. This combination of enthusiasm and discipline, or self-discipline, really, and perseverance. You need both, because I think if I'm just really enthusiastic about writing, I'll talk about it, but I'll never really get to it. And if I'm just like self-disciplined and persevering, but I don't have any enthusiasm, I can get it done, but I'll have no satisfaction when I get to the end. It's kind of a slog.
Mm.
So I find that there's almost like this two piston motor that needs to happen where I need to be excited about um, what I'm about to be writing. And sometimes it just comes from having a rough outline. I don't really outline too deeply. I'll actually, that's not quite true. I'll outline more deeply on a screenplay because I really want to have a really clear outline on that. But with a novel, I just want to have a beginning, a turning point, and kind of a resolution. I want to kind of know where I'm going. Almost like I need like a couple landmarks for where I'm going if I'm trying to drive through the city. But I want to also give myself bandwidth to explore every dark alley, take some other turns. If there's some traffic here, I know a side street, all of that. And so enthusiasm is when I see some of those landmarks along the way and I'm excited to get to my destination. I'm excited to write that next scene. Oh, I know there's a scene coming up that's going to be really juicy and fun. So I'm going to write this one so I can get to that one. And then also just the self-discipline, the perseverance, just to keep driving it. And that two-piston approach is how I'm able to kind of quiet things around me and get focused on the work. And that's what seems to work for me. But again, everyone's process will be different. It's important to kind of like really take the time to discover your process. Anytime you write and it goes really well, it's important to check in with yourself. What were the conditions? What were different about this? And it could just be, oh, I actually got some really good night's sleep that night, or I drank enough water, or whatever that looks like. But it's important to just figure out your process and then replicate it. When it goes well, ask yourself, what were some of the things that might have helped it go really well, and make it part of your process.
Nice. I find time and place help, and it depends on the story or the idea that you're thinking about, what you're trying to do. But so you're seeking to set up that correct time and place, that mood for whatever it is you're working on. But then when you're just sitting around and it strikes and you think, oh, I could write this. Usually that happens with me in short stories. And if you have an idea for a short story and you don't do it right then, it's probably just going to be on a list in your phone of ideas for short stories that you have to go do it right then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like working out, where I'm not always excited about going to work out, but I've never had a time where I worked out after I thought, I wish I didn't do that. So that's what I feel like with writing. Like I would trade a day of writing on a book for a good poem. Like I would trade that off. But it's interesting when you start to realize those processes you have. And then when I take notes, whenever the thought occurs, I put the date and the time with it. And I can look back at it when I'm organizing it, or I haven't put it in a spreadsheet and done a regression on it or anything. I don't have scatter plots or any charts on it, but you can start to see, well, these are the times where I'm thinking more about that. I have that more connection. And these are the times where I'm thinking about these other things, because you can take all those. Usually what I do when I have the notes fill up in the phone, I'll print them out and then I'll cut them into lines, however long the thought is. If it's a whole poem, if it's a line, if it's a quote, if it's whatever, and then I'll put them in different piles to organize them and say, okay, this is for a book, this is a poem, these are these other things. And then you can work on each little section when you want to. And I do find that when I'm putting those lines together for poems, they might be spread across a month of notes, but usually when they match up, they're in the same time of day. So I'm like, a 3 a.m. line is different than a noon line. And it's interesting to see how those. So I think that creative force you're connecting with is different. I mean, it might be part of a whole, but I think there are different sources coming into it. And so it's interesting to be able to trace those back and just see it a little.
I love that deep dive into it, and then that you're noting these dates and times. It's really fascinating and not surprising, but fascinating. Cool. Really cool.
What's the best way for people to follow your work?
Yeah. Well, I'm easy to find on social media. You can find me on Instagram at that Gregg Stewart. That's Gregg with 2 G's on the end. That Gregg Stewart, Stewart, Stewart. And I'm also I'm on the X on Twitter. the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Hmm.
And it's Gregg Stewart, but the double G on the end is actually two eights, so it's GRE88 Stewart. You can find me there. That's the two quickest places on social media. And I know I'm going to be launching a website soon, so I'll get that sorted out. And
Okay.
that'll be fun. But I'm easy to find on social media. And once the website's up and running, I'll certainly make an announcement in both places. But yeah, there's a few upcoming anthologies that I'm going to be in that I'm excited about. And then I'm just sharing this book, Let It Out, and I literally put my email address in the back of Let It Out. Then if someone, because I really do authentically want to know, if someone reads this book and they're inspired to create something, I want to hear about it. Tell me what you made. Tell me what you're working on. Tell me what you're doing. Yeah, I do
Nice.
want to know. And I'm always up for celebrating. I'm kind of one of those, what they call an advocate personality type. So I'm always in people's corners and rooting for them, whatever you're creating, especially if you're engaging with your creativity and learning something profound about yourself. I think it's an amazing thing. And I'm always in your corner rooting for you if you're doing that.
Very nice. Well, in the show notes, I'll have those links for your Instagram and X.
Cool.
People can
Nice.
contact you on there. And
Nice.
then maybe you might have an Amazon authors page. We can
Oh yeah, I do.
put on there too.
You could find me on Amazon, just Gregg Stewart. You could find me in the stuff I'm up to. Yep.
All right. Very nice. Any thing you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts in closing?
No, I don't know. Just to say, this was a really great conversation, and I love like I really, this is my exploration to podcasts. I told myself when I was releasing this book, I made a commitment to do. I wanted to do 10 podcasts between the release date and the end of the year. That's what I want to do. I just do 10 interviews just to talk about it and promote it. And this is the 6th one I've done of the 10. And I love how all the conversations go to different places, and it's like it's keeping me on my toes and different. And this was really, really a fun conversation. And thanks for the just really thoughtful questions, and a lot of big questions. Big, capital B kind of questions, big. And I appreciate you going there and your thoughtfulness, and thanks for that. And that makes for a more engaging conversation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a good talk. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll talk to you on the other. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.
Fantastic. Take care.